Chapter 2. First Steps into Education. As one chapter of my childhood quietly closed, another began. It was 1992 when my world shifted. Until then, life had unfolded gently in the narrow lanes of Vuyuru, under the care of my maternal grandparents. Their home had been my universe, a world of warmth, safety, and familiar sounds. As I turned 6, our days began to tighten under the weight of financial strain. My father's income as a cycle mechanic was never enough. Moreover, his drinking habits made things worse. My mother stitched cloth bags for small shops. She tried to make the little she earned stretch into meals for 3. I could feel the silences deepen between my parents. Even as a child, I sensed something was changing, but I couldn't understand. One evening, I overheard a quiet but serious conversation between my parents in the corner of our small house. By the end of it, they decided to leave Vuyuru for Hyderabad, which was then the capital city of Andhra Pradesh. Currently, Hyderabad is the capital of Telangana state. My mother believed that a city might offer better chances, not only for work, but also for livelihood. For me, it meant stepping into a world I couldn't imagine. But the thought was frightening and exciting at the same time. I didn't understand that we were parting with more than a house. We were leaving behind the comfort of my grandparents' home, the smell of tamarind rice from our kitchen, and the gentle murmur of my grandmother's evening prayers. We packed our belongings and boarded a crowded bus to Hyderabad. The ride felt endless. Dust blew through the open windows. By the time we reached the city, the world had grown noisier. The city had its own heartbeat. Bus horns, rushing crowds, and the constant rhythm of traffic that never seemed to rest. The air smelled different too, a mix of fried snacks and petrol fumes. My maternal aunt, Rajni Kumari, welcomed us into her home. Her warmth felt like a soft bridge between the world we had left behind and the one we were stepping into. She had 2 daughters whose laughter filled every corner of the house. I remember the scent of incense and the clatter of kitchen utensils. These sounds slowly made the city feel less strange. Both my aunt and her husband became our pillars during that time. Their constant support made it possible for my parents to dream again. While we were settling down, my uncle opened a door that my parents had never imagined. He planted the first seed of hope as he told of a school for blind children, Darul Shifa Blind Boys High School. Until then, the thought of me studying had felt distant, almost impossible. In Vuyuru, people mostly spoke about my blindness as a burden, but my uncle's words carried a positive light. For the first time, someone used the words Nagababu and education together. It was like hearing my name tied to a purpose. Before admitting me to school, my parents rented a single small room. That room became our whole universe. I still remember it had a tiny window that never let enough light in, but it was ours, so it felt good. The cement floor under my bare feet felt cool in the mornings and warm by night. A damaged sink clung to a wall, a few vessels stacked beside it, and above them hung a string that served as a clothesline. At night, we unrolled thin mats and slept on the floor. Privacy did not exist. Our lives unfolded in the single room where every breath and silence were shared. Outside, the reality of city tested us each day. A row of shared washrooms lined the narrow lane. The air was thick with a smell that never left. My mother used to fetch water from a common pump, waiting in line with neighbors. She used to carry pots balancing on her waist, feeling drained when she returned. Some mornings we had to rush to the tanker, jostling for our share of water. Every drop came with a struggle, and every meal came with an effort. And somewhere in that struggle, a quiet desire began to grow. One morning, amidst the hustle, my mother held my hand and said softly, "Today we'll visit your residential school." I didn't know what to expect. To my surprise, my grandmother joined us, along with my uncle. Their presence motivated me on my first day. We walked through the gates of Darul Shifa Blind Boys High School. The space buzzed with children's voices. Some laughed, called out to each other, and recited rhymes. Some were tapping teachers' canes on the ground, some reciting lessons and their voices carrying joy. I clung to my mother's sari, unsure if I belonged here. Both my mother and grandmother gently nudged me to step into the principal's office. Inside there were two men talking, the principal and a teacher. Their voices carried warmth. I greeted both. The teacher placed a few coins in my hand and asked, "Can you tell me what these are?" I touched them, turned them over, and felt their weight and ridges. 2 rupees. 1 rupee. 50 paise. I answered, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. A murmur of approval followed. I had unknowingly passed an invisible test of touch and recognition. The first few days were filled with mixed emotions: curiosity, nervousness, and fascination. Needless to say, I was enjoying learning new things. One of my first lessons was a rhyme, Chitti Chilakamma, a song about a little parrot. Initially, I was just listening to the other children. Their voices rose in chorus, bright and cheerful. Eventually, I joined. A few days later, while wandering down a corridor, I followed a melodious tone that took me to the music room. Inside, Ramarao sir, who was blind himself, played the harmonium. I sat along with a bunch of students. He introduced us to basic ragas. I tried following his voice but trembled. I still tried to follow. I sang but didn't master the notes. But a feeling touched my heart that said I might belong here. It was around this time that I was first introduced to Braille. The raised dots felt strange under my fingertips, like a secret code meant for people like me. I started to move too fast but missed the patterns. Then I slowed down and traced each dot gently. It was like the world had opened a new door for me. While I was adjusting to school life, my uncle believed I would also adapt to the hostel, where I was surrounded by other blind children. The idea sounded simple, but the first day told a different story. The hostel felt unfamiliar. I was outside my comfort zone. Thankfully, they allowed my grandmother to stay with me for a few days until I settled in. There were no special dormitories for younger children. In those days, the same spaces were used for many purposes. One large hall functioned as a dining area for lunch and dinner, and at night it became a sleeping hall. Most of us slept directly on the floor. There were no mattresses, only thin mats spread side by side. Along one side of the same hall, huge wooden and metal containers stored hot food. We were given small wooden boxes to keep our belongings. Those boxes were kept in a small room nearby, which often became hot from the stored food. Sometimes we had to wait outside until everyone had finished dinner before we could go back inside. It wasn't cruelty, it was simply how things were around 30 years ago. Education was not comfortable, and space was not sufficient. What mattered was that learning was happening despite the hardship. At night, children lay shoulder to shoulder on the hard floor, whispering and giggling before sleep. From the edge of the table, my grandmother tried to make space to rest. I slept on the floor, feeling the ground. The next morning brought harsh realities. The toilets reeked, the stench was unbearable, and the floors were slick and buzzed with flies. Each sound and smell etched deep in my memory. Days passed slowly. My grandmother tried to stay strong for me, but I could sense her struggle. Though I kept quiet, not wanting to lose my chance to study, she could no longer bear it. She told my mother about the situation. Not long after, my mother decided I wouldn't stay in the hostel. She came one morning, packed my stuff, held my hand, and took me home. I was silent, thinking she wanted me to stop studying. But she told me that nobody could stop me from moving forward in life. The next morning, she placed a handicapped bus pass in my hand. From that day onward, she would walk me to the bus stop, help me board, and travel with me to school. She waited outside the school until I finished my classes, and then we returned home together. I enjoyed the bus rides with her. The jingle of coins, the conductor's whistle, and the rumble of the old engine, all of which became my daily melody. The bus pass was not just a piece of paper for me. It was a lifeline and a bridge between me and my education. Over time, we became familiar with teachers and school staff. Some, but not all teachers were blind. My mother too had begun forming connections with people around the school. And one such connection was with Anasurya teacher, who was blind too. The first time my mother met her, a bond formed instantly. These two women understood struggle without words. By a twist of fate, she moved into the house next to ours. From then on, she became more than a teacher. She was a family. Every morning, the three of us walked together to the bus stop and then boarded a bus to school. There was something about that little procession. One blind woman, a small blind boy, and a sighted mother that made people stop and stare. Some looked puzzled, some whispered, and some offered help before we even asked. For strangers, it was curiosity. For us, it was comfort. Anasurya teacher taught my mother how to navigate the city, how to buy from shops, and even how to eat food outside without hesitation. She showed my mother small practical tricks like where the shopkeeper always keeps the best rice, which bus conductor would be patient, and which lane had an easier step. Her help was beyond skills. She was a steady advocate. She knew which doctor to visit when the need arose. She helped us learn Braille, and sometimes she simply sat with us and let silence do the healing. People would sometimes whisper about the sight of us supporting one another as if dependence were a fault, but they didn't know that this dependence came from practice, pride, and refusal to be diminished. To my mother, she was a map and a confidant. To me, she was a second mother who taught me small acts of dignity. My mother leaned on her, and I in turn leaned on them both. With her by our side, the world began to feel a little less frightening. But hardship still shadowed us. I often played with a cycle tire, rolling it down the street with a stick, laughing as it clattered over stones. That sound was my delight. One afternoon, I left it at the door while I went to the washroom. When I returned, I heard my mother crying. My father, drunk and angry, had used the same tire to hit her. The sound of that tire, once my source of laughter, now froze my heart. I abandoned it that day, and with it, a piece of my childhood. Months passed, nearly the end of my first standard, when life tested us again. My mother, pregnant with my sister, fainted on the road while on her way to pick me up. A lorry screeched to a halt, missing her by inches. Strangers rushed to her aid and carried her home. That day, I waited at school for hours, not knowing what to do, tears rolling down my face with every passing minute. 2 senior blind boys heard me crying and asked me about the situation. I explained them. "Don't cry, come, we'll take you," one said gently, holding my hand. They guided me to the bus, paid my fare, and brought me home safely. In the rush to reach my mother, I forgot to thank them. On the other side, I was so glad that my mother was safe. The next morning, I shared this incident with Anasurya teacher. She listened to me and said, "Nagababu, it's your duty to thank those who help you." Her words stayed with me forever. After my exams in April 1993, a fierce fight between my parents broke out at home. My uncle got to know and arrived without warning. He took my mother, my younger sister Shailaja, and me to the bus station. I remember the bus station's canteen clearly. The smell of sambar rice, a South Indian dish made of rice, vegetables, lentils, tamarind, and spices. The scent mixed with diesel fumes and the sound of bus horns. We ate quickly and boarded the bus. The ride was long. Dust blew through the open windows, touching my face. Then came sudden rain. Hailstones rattled against the roof of the bus. My mother, tired but alert, told me how rare such storms were. That was my first memory of hail, the strange wonder of stones falling from the sky. In July 1993, my second sister Shanti was born. Tiny, fragile, and beautiful. But our joy soon turned to worry when the doctor said she too was blind. My grandmother wept, holding the baby close and murmuring prayers. Even at that young age, I felt the heaviness in my heart. A month later, my father came to Vuyuru and took us back to Hyderabad. Soon after, my baby sister was admitted to Sarojini Devi Eye Hospital. For 7 long months, my mother stayed there, sleeping on the floor, living on meager meals, and whispering prayers. Her world had shrunk to that hospital ward. Hope lingered in those sterile corridors like a fragile light. When a donor eye was found for a corneal transplant, it felt like a miracle. We waited through sleepless nights of prayers, believing they might finally be heard. But fate was not ready to change. Our hope broke. The transplant failed. During this period, I used to stay at the hotel and visit my mother and sister in the hospital on weekends. Thereafter, I continued to live in the hostel throughout my schooling. I slept in the dining hall of the hostel, restless through the nights. Children snored nearby, rats scurried in the dark, and there was a lingering smell of cooked rice and lentil soup. Nights were long, but somewhere I began to find my flow. Staying in the hostel, I learned to do all my daily chores as a normal person would. I washed clothes, cleaned and organized my space, brushed and showered, and even helped my hostel mates. During school holidays, leaving the hostel was easy, but coming back was not. I used to cry endlessly when it was time to return. The idea of being away from my mother and home broke me every single time. But neither my mother, father, grandmother, nor any other family member allowed that fear to weaken me. Sometimes my father would cycle for 8 kilometers just to pick me up and drop me off at school and bring me back home. They spoke to me gently, sometimes firmly, always lovingly. Study, my mother would say. This is your strength, my uncle reminded me. Their belief was unshakable. They never treated my education as optional. They carried one clear intention in their hearts, that I must learn, that I must rise. I often think that if I had not studied, I would not be here writing these words today. Their vision of my future became the map for my life. At Darul Shifa school, during those early days, when everything felt unfamiliar and home seemed painfully far, I found comfort in a senior named Govind Reddy. He was a year older than me, gentle, calm, and understanding. The kind of friend who didn't need many words to make you feel seen. We both carried the same ache of separation, the same quiet homesickness that comes from leaving one's parents too soon. In the silence of those hostel nights, when footsteps faded and thoughts grew louder, it was often Govind who helped turn loneliness into laughter. We shared stories of our families, festivals we missed, and the small things we longed for, like the smell of home-cooked food and the comfort of familiar voices. In those moments, he was more than a senior. He was like an elder brother, guiding me through emotions I didn't yet know how to name. We studied together, played together, and learned to find joy in small things. From shared snacks to our walks across the school ground. Even now, after so many years, Govind Reddy remains the same good friend in my life. Whenever I reach out to him, he's ready to listen and always encouraging. That bond, built in the quiet halls of Darul Shifa, has never disappeared. A reminder that sometimes life brings the right people to walk beside us long before we realize how much we need them. In the hostel, we invented our own games with whatever we had. A coconut oil bottle filled with stones became a cricket ball, and a wooden slate became the bat. The rattle of the bottle guided us, and we chased it with joy. For a while, all our worries disappeared. By 1994, I was 8 years old. In 2 years, I had lived through more than I could understand. Leaving my grandparents' home, discovering school, witnessing my sister's birth, traveling through storms and learning that love sometimes meant endurance. I wasn't just learning rhymes or alphabets. I was learning to survive and to find light even where there was none. Education had begun for me, but so had life's hardest lessons.